Hey guys, tonight we're wandering into a place where the sun never seems to blink. The air is dry enough to parch your thoughts, and yet, somehow the breeze still whispers through the leaves of a rose bush. You stand in the center of an impossibly green oasis, surrounded by towering mud brick walls, and the scent of jasmine as a soft wind kisses your cheek despite the scorching heat outside. You're in ancient Persia, and, spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't survive this without a whole lot of shade and some seriously clever engineering. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. I love seeing how global this sleepy little history club is becoming. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've just arrived in a landscape that's not exactly friendly to the unprepared. Southern Iran, roughly 2,500 years ago, was not the place for impulsive afternoon jogs or dark-colored robes. The air is still, the ground cracked, and the only thing louder than the crickets is your own overheating brain, wondering why people ever settled here in the first place. And then, like a mirage, you step into the cool shadow of a garden. The change is instant. It's not just shady, it's soothing. The temperature drops, the light dims, and everything seems to slow. A narrow canal trickles nearby, shaded by cypress trees. Wind somehow is moving again. This isn't luck, it's architecture. More than that, it's philosophy. You've entered a paradise garden, and every breeze, every pool, and every vine here was placed with purpose. The Persians weren't just building gardens, they were designing survival. Unlike today's gardens that show off for Instagram, Persian gardens were utilities disguised as beauty. Their mission was to cool the body, calm the mind, and quietly defy a harsh desert. This concept of shaping space to create comfort wasn't a minor effort. It was an obsession, a dry obsession, but still, every element around you has been curated: the angle of walls, the height of trees, the flow of water, the exact layout of shade. Persian gardeners were like microclimate magicians sculpting air the way a painter shapes light. And they weren't doing it with electricity or motors, or even ice. No, they were harnessing gravity airflow and the sheer stubbornness of clever humans who refused to let the desert win. Historians still argue whether these gardens were primarily spiritual, practical, or political in nature. Most agree it was all three. Creating a haven in the middle of nowhere sent a message: we're powerful enough to make the wind obey. You sit by a tiled pool. The air is fragrant with mint. Somewhere unseen, a water channel murmurs beneath your feet. Your eyes droop a little. This isn't just shade, it's engineered peace. But how exactly did they do it? Well, the journey's only just beginning. We'll trace the roots of these gardens back through ancient Zoroastrian values, descend underground into tunnels that bring melted snow to your sandals, and climb high into windcatcher towers that still leave architects scratching their heads. You'll meet gardener poets who designed layouts like versus engineers who played with air like it was music, and noble families who built these green oases to flaunt both wealth and wisdom. And yes, there will be rose-scented breezes, but also melon walls, cooling domes, and philosophical arguments about whether a shadow should fall to the left or the right of a date tree. All of it designed to do one thing: keep you comfortable in a world that wasn't. You wander deeper into the garden, where the sun fades behind thick tree canopies, and low walls channel the breeze like a lazy river. It's here, shaded by mulberry branches, that you begin to understand this isn't just engineering. This is a mindset. To truly grasp how Persians learned to cool themselves using wind, you have to slip into their worldview. Specifically, a worldview shaped by Zoroastrianism, one of the oldest known organized religions. Founded well before 500 BCE, it wove its way through Persian culture like roots through soil. And just like a gardener plans for seasons, Zoroastrians planned for cosmic balance. According to this tradition, the world was made of 4 sacred elements: earth, water, fire, and air. Sound familiar? That's right. These weren't just poetic concepts. They were deeply practical. To harm or disrespect these elements was a spiritual offense. Burning trash or polluting a stream wasn't just bad manners, it was blasphemy. So if you're going to build something, anything, it must honor those elements, especially air and water. That's the root of Persian climate design, working with nature, not against it. Your host, a gentle old gardener with hands as lined as the bark of his pomegranate trees, explains without saying a word. He moves a stone slightly to redirect a trickle of water. He adjusts a vine so that it casts a perfect shadow on the clay path. Nothing is wasted. Every motion matters. The gardens weren't just escape hatches from the heat. They were meditations in motion. Think of them as philosophy. You could walk through each plant pond and pergola, a quiet sermon on balance and grace. Even the layout followed a spiritual blueprint. Most classical Persian gardens were designed in a chahar-bag format, literally 4 gardens. A large square was divided into 4 equal parts by 2 perpendicular water channels forming a cross. The center where they met often held a pool, a tree, or a platform symbolizing the cosmic axis, the center of the universe. Historians still debate whether this layout was meant to mimic Eden, the mythical Garden of Origins, or if it came from a more ancient pre-Zoroastrian pattern lost to time. Either way, when you stand in the middle of a chahar bag, it's hard not to feel centered. The symmetry, the stillness, it slows your breath. And that's no accident. The idea was to quiet the body through the design of the space. Wide shaded paths encouraged walking meditation. Gentle curves kept your eye moving. Reflections in water nudged your mind into stillness. Even the sounds birds, rustling water, trickling wind, brushing through leaves, worked like a natural sound machine. Of course not, every garden was perfectly symmetrical or grand. Some were humble plots beside homes. Others sprawled for acres around palaces. But the intention remained: create comfort through harmony. What's often overlooked is how social these spaces were. You weren't supposed to just sit and admire the roses, although frankly, that's a great plan too. These were spaces of conversation, storytelling, study, tea-drinking courtship, even debate. In some noble houses, you might spend an entire afternoon walking in slow circles through the shade discussing philosophy poetry, or camel prices, whatever struck your mood. The garden made thinking easier. It made breathing feel like poetry. One quirk you notice as you pad quietly past the date palms: the walls are high. Not just privacy high, fortress high. That's intentional. These weren't open lawns. Persian gardens excluded the chaos of the world. The dust, the heat, the noise left at the gate. Step inside, and you're somewhere else entirely. A contained paradise. Even the term paradise has Persian roots. The word comes from the Old Persian paradisa, meaning enclosed garden. Over time, it got absorbed into Greek Latin and later Christian and Islamic texts to mean something more heavenly. But the original meaning, just a space walled off filled with trees and water. And wind, of course. But we haven't even gotten to the wind yet. You're still grounded here in philosophy, still feeling the slow turn of time that shaped this quiet obsession. Because before they could catch the wind, Persians had to know what they were listening for. There's a saying attributed to Persian poets: one who hurries through a garden never hears the wind sing. And you're starting to understand why. You continue walking. Your sandals crunch softly on gravel, the kind that was deliberately chosen to make a satisfying whisper with every step. Above you, branches arc like cathedral vaults, framing strips of sky. The walls around you breathe, yes, breathe, releasing warmth, slowly exhaling the day's heat, long after the sun has slipped behind the mountains. The Persians believed architecture should work with time, not against it. Heat comes in predictable waves. Shadows fall in expected places. And once you understand the rhythm, you can compose with it. Like a gardener composing with seasons, Persian builders composed with wind and stone. Take the materials. The bricks around you aren't just baked earth, they are the earth. Clay from the very land beneath your feet, mixed with straw and sun-dried or kiln-fired into uniform shapes. These bricks weren't fancy, but they were thick, porous, and packed tight. Not a single surface here is an accident. They weren't building mansions to show off. They were building thermal batteries. Let's explain. Sunlight hits the outer wall all day. The thick bricks absorb it slowly like a camel sipping water. As night falls and the desert cools, the stored heat seeps out again, not into your room, mind you, but outward. Interior walls stay cool. Courtyards drop in temperature. It's like a giant stone sponge managing heat for hours after the sun disappears. And the layout helps too. Rooms aren't lined up like modern apartments. They're staggered, shaded, rotated, designed so that direct sunlight hits only where it's welcome. If you're clever, and trust me, these builders were, you can get a room that never sees direct sun, but always catches the breeze. Now, here's where it gets cleverer. You notice a small, dark opening at the base of a garden wall. It looks like an animal den, but it's not. It's part of a qanat, an underground water channel, that might have started its journey miles away in the mountains. The water is cold, having traveled beneath the earth. The air near the opening is cooler too, and if you lean in, you feel a draft. That's not just some stray wind, that's designed wind. By aligning garden structures with wind patterns and channeling air through shaded, moist spaces like qanats, Persian architects managed to drop air temperatures without electricity. In some areas, this air cooled up to 15 degrees Celsius before reaching the living space. Historians still argue whether the use of subterranean cooling began in Persia or was borrowed from even older Mesopotamian or Egyptian methods. But few dispute that Persian techniques refined it into an art form. The marriage of qanats and gardens wasn't just practical, it was poetic. Water moved silently beneath the soil, cooling the earth above it. Air passed through the tunnels, growing cooler as it danced above the flow. This natural air conditioning would rise through clever ventilation systems, sometimes through simple shafts, sometimes through what you'll soon learn are towering wind catchers. But even without towers, a humble home could breathe like a lung. The logic was simple, even if the math was complex. Hot air rises. Cold air sinks. Shade cools. Moisture cools more. If you guide these forces like a canal guides water, the results are magic. Or science. Or both, depending on how much sleep you've had. You pause to rest near a mud brick bench that hugs the wall in shadow. You sip from a cup of diluted pomegranate juice, a staple in gardens like these. Tart, cool, slightly earthy. As you drink, a soft gust brushes past, emerging from a nearby vent in the wall. The wind isn't strong, it's polite. It wraps you like silk. That breeze, as you'll come to learn, has been traveling. It has passed through tunnels, over stones, along shadowy paths, down corridors lined with fig trees and dampened clay. It's picked up coolness, dropped its dust, and arrived just in time to help you nap. And yet, no one sees it coming. There are no fans, no noise, just design. It's hard not to be impressed. You close your eyes briefly. Even here in this reconstructed past, you can almost feel your pulse slow. Persian builders didn't need fans. They had physics, they had patience, and they had an intimacy with nature that modern HVAC designers can only dream of. Soon, we'll meet the badgirs, those famous wind catchers that seem to defy logic, but first take one more sip of that juice and listen closely to the silence around you. Because the next time the wind brushes your cheek, you'll know it's not a coincidence. You rise from the shaded bench and begin following a narrow path paved with smooth river stones. The air smells faintly of cedar and wet clay. A quail hops across your path, unbothered by your presence. The breeze returns slightly cooler than before, and nudges you toward a carved archway ahead. You're entering the heart of the garden now, where geometry becomes philosophy and comfort becomes performance. Welcome to the walled paradise, the Persian paradisa, the root word for paradise itself. It's not just a garden, it's a system, a story, a place where wind and water are trained like obedient pets, and the desert is politely asked to wait outside. Inside these walls, the world becomes ordered. The chaos of the surrounding landscape dust storms, heat waves, camel caravans, complaining on the horizon is pushed back. Here, everything has balance. You stop at the center of the garden, where 4 narrow canals divide the land into quarters. This is the Shahar Bagh layout in action. The cross-shaped channels represent more than irrigation. They echo the rivers of paradise in ancient cosmology, 4 sacred streams that nourish life. In Zoroastrian thought, it was a glimpse of the divine. In the heat of a Persian summer, it was a design that actually worked. The paths align with cardinal directions. Trees are spaced to allow both shade and airflow. Fountains are placed not just for beauty, but to humidify the air and cool passing breezes. And the walls. They aren't just for privacy or defense. They reflect sunlight outward, reducing radiant heat. They're also tall enough to funnel wind in and down, turning a gust into a guided whisper. Historians still argue whether the earliest paradisa gardens were more sacred temple complexes or noble estates. Some archaeologists point to ancient inscriptions describing gardens as royal gifts, while others suggest they were agricultural test sites dressed in poetry. Either way, what's certain is this: they became symbols of both wealth and wisdom. Because taming a desert is one thing, doing it beautifully is something else entirely, and beauty mattered. The Persian aesthetic valued control, repetition, and mirrored symmetry. Even plants were chosen not only for utility but for form. Cypress trees, tall, straight, unbending lined walkways like polite guards. Pomegranate bushes with their fiery blossoms and heavy, fruit-framed, shaded corners. Vines twisted along trellises that doubled as shade makers and scent deliverers. You pass one such trellis now. It's covered in night-blooming jasmine, though it's barely midday. The scent is waiting like everything else in the garden for the right time. A gardener, barefoot face shaded by a cotton scarf, waters the path ahead of you. Not the plants, the path. He does it slowly, patiently, using a simple clay jug. As the water soaks into the stones, you feel the air grow noticeably cooler, evaporative cooling. Elementary school science elevated to poetry. This little trick called sardar was a daily ritual. It cooled walkways before guests arrived. Some historians suggest it was also used to signal hospitality. A freshly watered path meant someone was expected. A dry path. Don't bother knocking. Beyond the cross-shaped canals, you spot raised beds of herbs and vegetables. These aren't randomly scattered. Everything's planned. Taller plants on the outer edges for shade, lower ones toward the center for visibility. Water drains inward, not outward. Even the soil is composed to hold moisture longer. These gardens weren't just beautiful, they were quietly efficient. And the people who maintained them, gardeners, were more than laborers. In many households, they were respected experts, equal parts, botanist, engineer, and poet. In fact, many of Persia's great poets like Saadi and Hafez wrote verses directly inspired by gardens. In their works, a rose wasn't just a rose, it was a metaphor for knowledge, suffering, patience, or spiritual ecstasy. You pause by a small square pavilion in the center of the garden. The walls are open, the ceiling painted with fading floral motifs. A divan sits inside, low and wide, where scholars or nobles might recline with sherbet and read under the sound of trickling water. And above that, an opening in the roof, just a small one, barely the width of a plate. But it's aligned precisely to draw warm air upward, creating a chimney effect. Even this simple structure breathes. You lay down briefly on the cool stone bench and stare upward. The sounds around you are soft, the gardener's jug refilling the breeze catching in a tree's branches, the occasional coo of a dove. Nothing mechanical, nothing loud. Just layers of quiet, each one cooler than the last. And all of this is made possible by the wall. The wall that protects, reflects, supports, and focuses the garden inward. It's a boundary not just of space, but of intention. Beyond it, the desert rages. But in here, you sleep. You wake to the murmur of water, not a rushing stream, but the slow, deliberate sound of something ancient, something calculated. Beneath your feet, beyond the tiled platform, and down into the earth, flows one of Persia's greatest inventions, the qanat. You stand and stretch. The shade lingers like a light blanket. The air remains cool, even though the sun has climbed higher in the sky. Time to go underground. Now, don't worry, there are no bats or dripping cave walls here. A qanat is not a sewer, and it's not a river. It's a gentle slope, often stretching for miles, dug with patience and precision through mountains and desert rock. And all of it to accomplish one miraculous thing: move cold, clean water without a pump. You shuffle along a low hallway built for demonstration, following the path your sandals might have taken in ancient times. The air is cooler here, even below the surface. Why? Because the earth is a natural insulator. Once you're a few meters down, temperatures stabilize no matter how hot it is above. The deeper the water flows, the colder it remains. Persians figured this out over 2,500 years ago. Imagine it a system so advanced that snowmelt could be gathered in distant mountains, channeled through gently sloping tunnels underground, and emerge sometimes several days later in a city garden or village miles away, with no moving parts, just gravity. The slope between 1 and 3 degrees. That's it. Too steep the tunnel floods. Too shallow the water stalls. It's a miracle of balance. Now you might be wondering, how did they build it? Vertical shafts were dug at regular intervals like stair steps to allow workers to descend, clear rock check alignment, and remove spoil. These shafts, often still visible today, as tidy holes dotting the desert, also acted as air vents, helping regulate internal temperature and air quality for workers and the water. You pass one now. A faint light shines through. A single vine reaches down like a curious child. Historians still argue whether the original qanat system began in the Persian highlands, or if it was imported from even older Mesopotamian traditions. Some even suggest it may have been developed independently in several places. But there's no doubt the Persians refined and expanded it, eventually spreading it as far as Egypt, Morocco, India, and Spain. But the genius of the qanat isn't just in water delivery. It's what happens when air meets water underground. In especially hot regions, architects designed air shafts and wind tunnels that passed over the flowing water. As air moved through the tunnel drawn by pressure differences, slope, and architecture, it cooled dramatically. By the time it emerged into a room garden or dome above it, carried with it a gentle chill, like a mountain breeze. You pause at a junction point where 2 channels meet. One brings water. The other, just a carved tunnel, carries wind. The meeting place is humid, shaded, and still. The air has a sweetness to it, almost metallic, but clean. You take a deep breath and feel it in your lungs. Old air, mountain air, filtered by earth and guided by design. Now here's where things get even sleepier above this system. Persian homes were built to receive the coolness. In simple structures that meant letting the air vent directly into living rooms or courtyards. In grander estates, it was distributed through a sardab, a cooled basement space often used as a summer retreat. Sardabs were placed precisely where the coolest water and wind converged. Inside, temperatures could drop by 20 degrees Celsius without any artificial assistance. You walk into one now. The walls are thick and clay-coated. The light is dim but golden. On the floor, a low divan with cushions invites you to sit. And you do. Of course you do. The floor is cold. The air smells like mint and lime mortar. A low humming silence fills your ears, the sound of a structure breathing. You reach for a bowl of something sweet falude, perhaps a traditional frozen dessert made with rose water and thin noodles. Yes, it's strange. But here under layers of earth and poetry, it's perfect. This section of your journey might feel quiet. And it is. That's the point. The qanat system was not dramatic. It didn't announce itself. It was quiet infrastructure, invisible luxury. An engineering whisper passed from mountain to city, from glacier to date tree, all without lifting a finger. So much of Persian architecture works like this. Soft systems, gentle changes, things you only notice if you pay attention. You lie back against a cushion, listening to the water trickle below. It's as if the earth is exhaling. You close your eyes and drift for just a moment, imagining a world where air conditioning doesn't roar and water doesn't hiss through pipes, where everything flows predictably and patiently toward comfort. And as you begin to nod off again, one final whisper stirs in the air, rising from beneath the garden like a secret kept by the stones. You stir not from noise, but from a shift in temperature. A soft breeze dances across your face, gentle as a silk thread being drawn through the air. You sit up slowly still inside the sardab and follow that whisper of wind as it snakes up a narrow stairway. Where's it coming from? Time to look up. Because now you're about to meet the wind catcher, or, as the Persians called it, the badgir. And trust me, this isn't just a chimney with dreams. You step outside into the late afternoon warmth and your eyes immediately catch it. Rising above the courtyard like a sandstone periscope is a tall, rectangular tower. It's open at the top sometimes on one side, sometimes on all four. From the outside it looks simple, maybe even decorative. But that tower is anything but. Badgirs are marvels. They don't just catch the wind, they negotiate with it. Built to harness the prevailing breezes, badgirs were positioned with exacting care. If the wind blew primarily from the northwest, that's the side left open. Inside the tower is hollow with narrow shafts, leading downward often toward a basement or the living space below. When the wind enters, it's immediately redirected downward through the structure. As it moves, the narrow shaft compresses and accelerates the air, forcing it to travel faster, cooling it naturally. And if there's a qanat nearby, even better. The air can pass over cold water, dropping several degrees before reaching you. But here's where it gets even more magical. What if there's no wind? Still works. When the outside air is hot and still, the tower's structure creates pressure differentials. Hot air inside the home rises naturally. Remember, hot air always tries to escape. The badgir becomes an exhaust system, pulling warm air out, creating a vacuum below that draws in cooler air from shaded courtyards, or qanats. The tower doesn't just catch the wind, it makes wind happen. Historians still debate the precise origin of the badgir. Some believe its roots stretch back to Babylonian cooling strategies. Others suggest it was purely a Persian invention, later adopted by Arabs, Egyptians, and even reaching parts of medieval Spain. Regardless, what's certain is that by the 10th century, cities like Yazd had hundreds of them dotting the skyline like guardians with open mouths. And they weren't all identical. You notice that the tower here has a vertical divider inside its shaft. That's to control the flow, dividing intake from exhaust. Some towers were octagonal. Some had angled vanes. Others had internal reservoirs that could drip water and add humidity to the dry breeze. These were not primitive air ducts. They were handmade microclimate machines, tuned like instruments to the specifics of every home. You pass under the shadow of one now and hear it, barely a hollow whisper, as the breeze spirals downward through the shaft. It lands softly on your face. Not a gust, not a draft, just a suggestion, like someone reminding you to breathe slower. In larger estates, badgirs were used in pairs. One to catch the wind, one to release the stale air. This push-pull created a kind of natural ventilation cycle. Some even worked in reverse at night when temperatures dropped dramatically. Cool night air would be funneled down, stored in the thick masonry, and released slowly through the next day. You step inside one of these homes, a modest clay-walled structure, no larger than a modern studio. But it's cooler than the street outside. No fans, no humming machines, just the hum of physics and patience. On the ceiling, a cloth canopy sways slightly. Below it, a ceramic bowl filled with water and basil leaves releases scent as the air flows past. You sit. The stillness is different here. It's alive. This is where comfort lives, in the details. A child walks past carrying a tray of apricot paste and melon. You follow the sound of sandals slapping against cool tiles. Around the next corner, the tower rises again. This one has 4 openings, each aligned with a compass direction. A true multi-directional badger. No matter which way the wind turns, it will find a path in. This garden, you're told, was home to a poet astronomer, someone who could chart the stars and tell the temperature from the way a leaf moved. He built his tower not only to catch wind, but to listen to it. The hollow shaft, he believed, carried messages from the hills. A weather forecast in whispers. Is it science? Maybe. Superstition? Perhaps. But when you hear the way that breeze sings its low note through the masonry, it's hard not to believe the wind has something to say. You linger beneath the tower, close your eyes, and let it speak to you. You stay under the tower longer than expected. Not because you're stuck, but because the air is that good. It coils around your shoulders like a cool shawl, tugging away the sun's weight from your skin. And as you drift in and out of a daze, something curious happens. You begin to notice the sound of the space. Not noise. Sound. Intentional acoustics. The quiet rush of air. The bubbling water from a nearby pool. The faint clack of a wooden shutter in the breeze. It's all composed like an orchestra of calm. This brings us to something most people overlook about Persian architecture. It wasn't just about form and function. It was about sensation. Persian architects knew that temperature wasn't just about degrees, it was about perception. A slightly cooler breeze feels colder if it carries moisture. Shade feels deeper when it's silent. A breeze seems more refreshing when it arrives with a change in scent or sound. And so they layered it all together. You enter a small domed chamber, known as a house khane or pool room. It's square modest and dimly lit by shafts of light that descend from small circular holes in the roof. In the center, a shallow octagonal pool filled with turquoise water, edged with tile. At its heart, a small bubbling fountain gurgles, constantly, never splashing, just murmuring. This fountain isn't for display, it's a cooling mechanism. The rising droplets release moisture into the air. The sound of bubbling water dulls the heat's psychological edge. Even the color of the tiles, cool blues and greens, adds to the illusion. Historians still argue whether these features were born from experimentation or inherited from older temple designs. Either way, they understood that cooling wasn't just physical, it was emotional. You run your hand through the water. It's not icy, just cool enough to make you smile. The wind from the badger above finds its way down a narrow shaft and meets the water at the pool's edge. The result: a steady breeze scented with damp clay, old stone, and rose. The ceiling above you curves inward. Not for decoration, though it's lovely, but for acoustics. The dome captures sound, carries it, and amplifies certain frequencies while dampening others. In larger pavilions, this created a natural hush. Whispered conversations became private, even if the room was full, and it didn't end with domes. Walls were often curved or angled to guide airflow and soften echoes. Floors were made with textured stone that stayed cool underfoot but muffled walking noise. Even curtains, often made from dampened fabric, added both scent and silence. You lean against the wall and let the stillness envelop you. The space is simple but deeply intentional. It's not trying to impress you, it's trying to relax you. In larger homes and palaces, some wind catchers were connected to a network of ducts guiding cool air into different rooms based on the time of day or the needs of the occupant. a sort of manual gravity-fed climate control system. Even the doors were part of the system, placed so that opening one would redirect the breeze toward a hotter space. You notice a narrow window cut high into the far wall. It's shaped like a pointed arch and filled with a wooden screen carved in repeating floral patterns. This isn't just pretty, it's wind sculpture. The shape and placement guide airflow downward while also diffusing light-reducing glare. And that light matters. Harsh light heats. Diffused light cools. Persian builders knew that windows weren't just holes, they were tools. In fact, there was a kind of poetry in how every surface was asked to do multiple jobs. A wall wasn't just a divider. It reflected heat, guided wind, carried sound. A tile wasn't just decoration. It brightened the space, cooled the floor, added color to your mood. A fountain wasn't just water. It was breath and rhythm and a quiet lullaby when the world outside became too loud. You walk through the room, slowly, the damp breeze playing at your sleeves. The air has traveled miles to get here, from mountaintop to tunnel, from tunnel to garden, from garden to this moment. It's been filtered, cooled, perfumed, and finally delivered to your skin. And all of it, silent, passive, free. It's the kind of comfort modern systems try to replicate with ducts and thermostats and humming machines. But here you realize that peace can be designed not by fighting nature, but by listening to it. You sit once more beside the central pool, and the air sighs over your shoulder like a lullaby. No wires, no switches, just windstone and centuries of quiet wisdom. You leave the domed chamber and return to the open air of the garden, if you can call this cloistered space open. Overhead, grapevines weave a living ceiling across a wooden trellis, dappling the sunlight into soft patterns. You walk slowly, letting the filtered warmth brush across your arms while a fresh breeze curls around your ankles. You've seen how Persian architecture catches and cools the wind, how water and geometry soothe the senses. But there's another piece to this comfort puzzle, one just as essential and just as artfully designed: sound. Or rather, the lack of it. In a Persian garden, silence wasn't accidental. It was cultivated. Every corner, every stone, every canopy was placed not just to please the eye or cool the air, but to still the mind. These gardens weren't just beautiful, they were acoustically tuned. You pause in the center of a narrow corridor lined with thick hedges. There's no echo here. Your footsteps are hushed by earth and leaf. When you stop, the silence wraps around you like a cloak. Historians still debate whether this attention to sound was based on spiritual beliefs. Zoroastrians certainly valued quietude as a path to clarity, or if it simply evolved alongside the engineering. But whatever the reason, the result is palpable. In these walls, wind has a voice, and that voice changes depending on where you stand. Approach a narrow corridor aligned with a badgir's shaft, and you'll hear a soft hum, like the low note of a flute played far away. Step into a dome and the breeze takes on a rounder tone, whispering in slow circles. Near the pools where water trickles and cools the tiles, the sound is softest of all, just the glug and sigh of movement you didn't notice at first. You pass a small arched entryway and step into another space, a reading alcove maybe, or a place where tea was once poured. The ceiling is low-curved like a seashell. You test your voice just a hum, and hear it echo faintly, curling back to you with a softness you didn't expect. These spaces were designed not just to manage heat, but to manage emotion. A home with hot walls is a miserable place, but a home that's noisy and hot, that's unbearable. So Persians designed against both. They made stillness part of the plan. You walk past a window, another mashrabia screen, its delicate latticework, casting a filigree of light and shadow on the ground. Here, too, airflow and acoustics meet. The air enters gently, bouncing off the wooden grills, softened by the screen's curve. The result, no whistles, no drafts, just a cooled hush. It might not seem like much, but in a world without compressors or fans, these little tricks made the difference between rest and irritation. You reach the far side of the garden now, where the walls give way to a small private pavilion. Inside, the floor is raised slightly and tiled in pale green. One corner has a shallow water channel carved to run beside a sleeping platform. You sit on the edge and trail your hand in the cool stream. The air here is damp heavier somehow, almost as if it's been taught to linger. And then there it is again, that gentle shh of moving air. Not the wind you know from outside. Not a gust or a flap or a whistle. Just a suggestion. The sound a robe might make when it brushes a doorway. A lullaby of physics. In modern buildings, we're used to temperature being a number. 22 degrees Celsius, 72 Fahrenheit. It's fixed, controlled, exact. But here comfort is not a number, it's a sensation. It's the way warm air rises through a ceiling vent while cool air hugs the floor. It's the way a pool gurgles when a breeze passes. It's the way your skin registers scent as part of the air, not separate from it. And scent matters too. Jasmine, basil, damask rose, mint, lemon balm. The very plants grown in these gardens were chosen as much for aroma as they were for shade. Each leaf and blossom added a layer to the wind's character. The breeze didn't just cool it perfumed. You pick a sprig of mint from a nearby pot and rub it between your fingers. The scent is sharp, clean, and alive. A moment later, the wind picks it up and carries it away. You watch it go. It's easy to forget how many layers are working here. Walls, windows, air shafts, plants, fountains, tiles, domes, channels, bricks, all speaking quietly to each other, exchanging heat and coolness motion, and stillness, light, and shadow noise, and silence. And all of them are working for you. Not because you asked, not because you flipped a switch, but because centuries ago someone watched how the wind moved through a valley and thought, we can use that. You lie down on the cool tile and let the silence settle over you like dust on a windowsill. The air continues to move soft and sure. The garden breathes. And you're just along for the ride. You don't know how long you lay there. Maybe an hour, maybe a few centuries. The air is just that convincing. But eventually, the garden shifts around you. The light slants gold, the breeze picks up its pace, and distant voices hint at something new. This wasn't just a home or a hiding place. In ancient Persia, gardens like these were also social theaters, quiet stages where comfort made people linger, and lingering led to politics, poetry, or proposals. Today, you're stepping into the heart of that world, a garden of the elite. These weren't casual green spaces. They were status symbols, investments, art projects, and architectural flexes all rolled into one. If you were someone of means, a nobleman, scholar, or merchant, you didn't just want a cool room in summer. You wanted the kind of place that made other people jealous in a very polite voice. You enter a larger courtyard now, far grander than the one you just left. Marble slabs pave the walkways. Sculpted cypress trees rise in uniform ranks. The channels of water are wider here, more like streams than trickles, and at the center of it all is a pavilion built over a reflecting pool. The roof of this structure is something to behold: carved cedar, gilded trim floral patterns painted in faded indigo and saffron. This is a place designed for lounging with intent. You step inside and immediately notice the drop in temperature. Here, every cooling technique you've seen so far is layered like a pastry. The walls are thick but embedded with ceramic cones that carry sound and air. The floor tiles are glazed but slightly textured to stay grippy when damp. The air has traveled down from a badgir, crossed over a canal, and exited through high vents behind the tapestry-covered back wall. You're not just sitting in a room, you're sitting in an experience. A servant might have approached here, offering sherbet, a chilled mixture of fruit juice, flower petals, and crushed snow hauled in from mountain caves. That's right, actual snow stored underground in yak chals, ancient ice houses with domed tops and insulated walls. Between the badgirs, the qanats, and these early refrigerators, the elite could enjoy frozen treats, while camels passed out in the sun 2 blocks away. Historians still argue whether yakchals were originally Persian inventions, or imported from neighboring Bactria, or even India. But the Persian love affair with cold things on hot days, absolutely homegrown, and the people gathered here, they weren't just relaxing. These were gardens of ideas. Persian nobles often hosted salons in these spaces, where poets would recite verses about roses, and lost astronomers would sketch star maps with a stick in the dust, and travelers would share stories of wind catchers in other lands, some taller, some with mirrored interiors, some even using copper veins to sharpen the cold. You can imagine the scene, a circle of loosely reclined figures, each leaning against cushions, sipping something tart, while the soft rush of water fills the gaps between conversation. A garden lizard scuttles by. No one notices. They're too deep in a debate about whether a garden should imitate nature or perfect it. And this wasn't just upper-class nonsense. These debates had real stakes. The cooling technologies used here influenced urban planning, resource distribution, even imperial diplomacy. A well-placed garden was a gift to the city. A poorly planned one could sour political alliances. More than once, kings and advisors walked together in gardens like this, strategizing the fate of armies while pretending to admire the peach blossoms. You rise and cross to the far side of the reflecting pool, where a small platform juts out over the water. Its surface is smooth, almost too smooth. This is polished marble selected for its ability to remain cool even under direct sunlight. If you lie on it during a summer evening, you can feel the chill creep into your back slowly, like the memory of a breeze. This pavilion was also a listening room, not for music necessarily, but for words. The acoustics make every voice intimate. The dome carries whispers. You don't need to raise your voice ever. Even laughter arrives in velvet tones. In the far corner, you spot a censer, a small bronze bowl filled with burned herbs. The lingering scent of sandalwood and dried orange peel lingers in the air, not to overpower, just to remind you that luxury here is measured in how little effort things seem to require. You recline as those nobles once did, and let your eyes settle on the ceiling. Swallows dart through narrow arches. A breeze finds you again, rounding a pillar, crossing the pool, touching your cheek with the faintest trace of rose. Nothing buzzes. Nothing clanks. No one hurries. The world outside might be ablaze, but here the wind has been trained. The garden listens, and you quite possibly are cooler than you've ever been before. You linger by the pavilion a little longer, basking in the subtle choreography of water and air. Then curiosity tugs at your sleeve again. You've seen the shady walkways, the whispering domes, the wind-bending towers, but something's still missing. Something more playful. You follow a stream lined with smooth pebbles, its current slow but steady until you reach a clearing. Here, the garden opens up in a new way. Less formal, less symmetrical. Still calculated, but with a touch of mischief. You're entering the realm of Persian fountains, not just decoration, but an essential part of the cooling ensemble. These aren't towering geysers or dramatic sculptures. They're low deliberate, often barely breaking the surface. But what they lack in height, they make up for in impact. At first glance, it's just a square pool with small stone jets gently bubbling at each corner. The water never sprays. It purls. Ripples stretch slowly across the surface like silk unraveling. But step into its path, even just your toes, and the air around the pool feels cooler. This is no accident. The evaporative effect is subtle but constant. As water breaks the surface and reforms, it pulls heat from the air. The breeze passing over these pools absorbs that coolness and carries it outward like a chilled whisper sent through the garden. Even better, the water is moving just fast enough to discourage mosquitoes and dust, but slow enough to stay calm. Historians still argue whether these fountains were purely practical or also encoded with spiritual symbolism. In Zoroastrianism and later Islamic philosophy, water is sacred, both purifier and life-giver. The number of jets, the shape of the pool, even the direction of flow could reflect theological geometry. But theology aside, there's something unmistakably luxurious about walking barefoot past a series of whispering fountains, each placed to greet the breeze halfway. You stop at one and notice a detail, an incline just a degree or two. The surface of the entire courtyard is tilted ever so slightly enough to let water flow gently from one fountain to the next. No pumps, no clatter, just gravity and good taste. Nearby children once played with floating rose petals, watching them spin lazily in eddies, chasing them down shallow channels that wound through courtyards. On summer evenings, adults would drag cushions outside and rest beside the fountains, letting the cooled air drift over them until sleep finally came. You hear it now, a breeze tickling the surface of the water, creating a ripple that catches sunlight. The reflected shimmer dances across the underside of an awning. It's like light is breathing with the air. Then you spot something curious, a marble half-pipe embedded in the floor and ending at a low fountain. This, you learn, is a water chute used during garden feasts. Cold water would rush down it, carrying small cups of sweetened drinks or frozen desserts delivered right to waiting guests like a slow-motion conveyor belt of delight. Yes, it's playful, but it's also brilliant. The act of moving water cools it further. It freshens the air. It entertains. You wonder how many poets got their best ideas while watching a melon half bob its way toward them on a stream. And what about color? In the corners of the courtyard, the tiles shift from white to cobalt blue, then to deep emerald green. Not just aesthetic choices, these colors are psychologically cooling. Blue and green remind the mind of watershade and growth. They amplify the perception of freshness even when the temperature holds steady. You pause in one of these blue-tiled alcoves, watching as the breeze curls across the pool and lifts the hem of your robe. The wind has traveled far to get here through tunnels across water over bricks. And now it moves past you, crisp and quiet, toward a row of fruit trees lining the far edge of the courtyard. Pomegranate, fig, quince. These trees do more than provide snacks. Their low-hanging branches create pockets of shade, and their leaves, broad and matte, interrupt the sunlight just enough to drop the temperature below them. Persian gardeners didn't plant randomly. They planted strategically, fruit near fountains, vines near walls, shade trees at wind entry points. And then there's the scent. Even now, as you pass a lime tree and brush its blossoms, the air seems to change again. The garden's scent is always in flux. A little rose here, a little citrus there. And at sunset, the jasmine opens. The wind carries it first to the sitting platform, then to the fountains, then across the sleeping area. This too was planned. Gardens were designed so that the night wind would pass through the most fragrant areas, first perfuming the air, just as people settled into their cushions for the evening. You find yourself smiling, not because of one grand gesture, but because of 1,000 small ones. Each detail, every fountain, every petal, every air current was chosen to cool you, to soothe you, to help you sleep. And if it's working now in this imagined moment, imagine how well it worked in the real ones. You follow the wind again. It seems to know the way better than you do, toward a narrower path flanked now by rows of fruit-bearing trees. Not scattered or wild, but arranged like polite guests at a formal banquet. The air grows denser here, laced with the faint tang of ripening fig and the earthy sweetness of pomegranate. You've stepped into one of the most subtle cooling mechanisms in the Persian gardener's toolkit: fruit walls and shadow traps. No, not walls made of fruit, though that would be fun. These were walls lined with fruit trees, trained over time to grow in compact, orderly rows, creating shaded corridors that captured cool air during the night and held it well into the day. The trick here was thermal mass and staging. You place your hand on one such wall, baked clay, thick and slightly damp, where the gardener watered the base this morning. It feels cool to the touch even though the sun hangs high overhead. That's because the wall shaded all morning by the canopy of quince and apricot absorbed barely any heat. Meanwhile, the breeze guided between the tree trunks and brick is compressed, slightly sped up just enough to amplify the cooling sensation. This is what Persian builders called a sarband, a thermal buffer zone, a shaded space between the garden's exterior heat and its interior sanctuary. Think of it like an airlock made of leaves. The trees do more than shade, of course. Their transpiration, the evaporation of water from leaves, adds moisture to the air. You don't notice it as a mist, but you feel it as softness. The kind of softness that makes a breeze feel cooler than the thermometer would suggest. Historians still debate how intentional this layering was in early gardens. Was it all trial and error refined over centuries? Or did early Persian horticulturists understand microclimates on a scientific level? Hard to say. But the results speak for themselves. You pass under a low arbor where vines twist up wooden lattices, heavy with young grapes. This is another form of air filtering. The leaves slow, the wind slightly scatter the light and cast flickering shadows on the ground that trick the eye into feeling cooler. Even the ground underfoot changes here. Gone are the tightly laid tiles. In their place, packed earth and fine gravel surfaces that retain less heat and allow excess water to seep through, dampening the air just above it. Persian gardeners weren't just planting for taste or color. They were planting to lower the temperature. And the layout matters too. As you turn a corner, you notice how the path suddenly narrows, then widens again into a small pocket of open space. This wasn't just for visual drama. It was about airflow control. Narrow paths compress the breeze, forcing it to move faster. Wider areas let it slow and settle. By alternating between the two, the garden creates a rhythm like a breathing body. In one such opening, a tiled bench hugs the base of a mulberry tree. You sit feeling the difference. The breeze here is cooler, more direct. That's because the tree's branches arc overhead, funneling wind downward, one of the few vertical vents in an otherwise horizontal world. Above you, long cords dangle from branches, some with dried clay bells, others with bits of ribbon or soft fabric. They twitch as the wind passes, indicating not just direction, but strength. Gardeners would use these to monitor airflow throughout the day, adjusting water channels, opening or closing screens, even relocating cushions based on where the coolest pockets of air settled. And then there's the smell. You crush a fig leaf between your fingers. It releases a peppery green scent, sharp, fresh, almost citric. Beside you, a basket of herbs rests in the shade: basil, tarragon, purslane, mint. These too were cooling tools. Not just in the breeze, but in food. Persian meals in the garden were served chilled when possible: abdu kiyar, a cold yogurt cucumber soup, for example, or melon with rose water. Every part of the experience, sight, smell, taste, sound, temperature, was curated for maximum relaxation. You lean back on the bench. The wind slows, the scent lingers, and for a moment you feel like you're being gently held by the garden. Not just cooled, not just entertained, but embraced. The wind doesn't rush here. It glides. It remembers the path. It carries the shade like a story from one leaf to the next. You close your eyes again, and as your breath syncs with the movement of the branches overhead, you realize something strange. You can actually feel the garden anticipating sunset. You stay still, eyes half closed, beneath the canopy of the mulberry tree, and the garden leans in closer. The wind shifts slightly heavier now. The day begins its long, slow descent into evening. And as the temperature drops, something marvelous happens. The garden begins to bloom again. Not visually, not audibly, aromatically. This is when the Persian garden reveals its final secret weapon in the quest for comfort: scent on the wind. You catch it first in the edges of your breath, soft and faint. A flicker of damask rose so subtle you almost doubt it. Then, a trace of night-blooming jasmine not yet fully opened, but already awake. Soon it will be joined by basil lemon balm, and a dozen other herbal fragrances that lie in wait all day for this moment. It turns out the Persian gardeners were not just engineers and architects, they were perfumers of the wind. It's not just about planting fragrant things, it's about where you plant them. Jasmine and roses, for example, were placed in the path of evening breezes, usually west-facing walls, where the sunset heat would trigger their bloom, and the cooler wind would lift their scent and carry it deep into the house or across a sleeping terrace. And it worked. Imagine lying on a thin mattress in an open-air iwan, that semi-enclosed porch used for sleeping in hot weather. The plaster behind you is still cool from the shade. The ceiling above is wooden with carved floral patterns you'll never fully memorize. And then, like a ribbon, the scent finds you. First mint, then rose, then a little honeyed fig. Historians still debate whether the use of scented wind was discovered by chance or designed from the beginning. There's little written record of gardeners saying, "Hey, I want this breeze to smell like paradise," but the poetry tells you all you need to know. You may have heard of Sadi, the Persian poet, whose works still whisper from marble in Shiraz. He once wrote of a man carrying rose petals in his cloak, and even after he dropped them, the cloth retained the fragrance. It had been near a rose, he wrote. How could it not smell sweet? That's this garden. Even the wind has touched the rose. You follow a small path now heading toward the back of the estate. Here the plants change again. Lavender, rue, saffron, crocus. The latter blooms in autumn, yes, but its grass-like leaves are planted deliberately among early spring herbs to confuse pests and enhance air quality. Again, not random. Never random. You kneel beside a patch of sweet marjoram, brushing your hand across it. The leaves give off a warm, piney scent. Then the wind rises and carries it away toward the tiled veranda, where in the past guests might have just arrived. One of them perhaps brings a gift, a small clay jar filled with rosewater or attar of herbs, meant to be dabbed on wrists or mixed with drinking water. This is not fragrance as vanity, it's comfort, cooling, psychological shading. Even the body was trained to blend with the garden. You enter a scent corridor next an alley of climbing roses on one side, sweet basil on the other, and a narrow stream trickling down the center. The wind moves through this tunnel at a steady pace, brushing against every leaf-lifting scent like a ribbon and delivering it to a larger sitting space just beyond. It's a funnel, a fragrance funnel, and you walk straight into it. The result, you feel not just cooler, but lighter. Your pulse slows, your shoulders drop. It's a kind of relaxation modern aromatherapy only dreams of replicating. And then the incense. You spot it tucked beneath a tree, a small terracotta censer placed on a stone ledge where it catches just enough wind to do its work. Inside dried herbs, maybe sandalwood myrrh or bay leaf smolder. Slowly their smoke curling in elegant spirals before being caught and dispersed by the breeze. This too is part of the wind's job, not just temperature control, not just circulation, but emotion management. A breeze that smells like citrus and rose doesn't just cool your skin, it tells your brain to relax, to rest, to stay a while. And in this garden, that message repeats again and again with every scented gust. You recline on another low bench just in time for the last blush of sunlight to hit the top of the Badgir Tower. The breeze has changed direction now, slower, more downward. Gravity pulling cool night air toward the earth. The scent of rosewood deepens. Someone in the distance is cooking rice with barberries and saffron. Even that smell, filtered and distant, is part of the garden's design. Because the Persian garden doesn't end at the wall. Its wind reaches everywhere, and so you breathe it in and smile. Because when the wind has touched so many petals, it would be rude not to let it touch your dreams too. Evening settles in like a silken robe, and the garden takes on a new mood. More reflective, quieter, cooler. The heat has gone elsewhere. Now the wind slows to a crawl. Not lazy, just deliberate. Purposeful. It's in no rush. Neither are you. This is the perfect time to meet the true stewards of the garden, not the nobles or architects, or even the kings who funded the fountains. No, the real artists behind this cooling symphony were the gardener poets. Yes, you heard that right. In ancient and medieval Persia, gardeners weren't just diggers and waterers. They were philosophers in sandals, part horticulturist, part engineer, part mystic. And many of them were poets composing verses between pruning sessions or watering fig roots by moonlight. You sit cross-legged now on a raised clay platform under an archway, where one such gardener may have once paused to scribble a line of poetry into the dust. You pick up a smooth stone and mimic the motion. Nothing fancy, just the shape of a flower. The wind brushes it away in a few seconds. The point wasn't permanence. The point was attention. These men and sometimes women understood that gardening was a form of thinking. Each curve of a path, each placement of a tree, each calibration of the qanats slope required patience and reflection. To train wind was to contemplate movement. To guide scent was to study time. One such figure you might have met had you wandered through Shiraz in the 13th century was Hafez, not just a poet, but a connoisseur of gardens wine and the wind's moods. His verses are full of garden metaphors, not because they were pretty, but because they were precise. Wind for Hafez was never just air. It was memory, desire, change. Go breeze, he wrote, and tell the rose to bloom again. Others like Omar Khayyam were mathematicians who moonlighted as wine-sipping philosophers beneath cypress trees. He could calculate the arc of the stars and the ideal shape of a garden basin. The blend of logic and beauty was the Persian way. Historians still argue whether these figures were involved in actual garden construction or simply inspired by them. But in many surviving texts, we find notes, literal margins in manuscripts where poets made diagrams, not of stanzas, but of airflow, water circulation, tree arrangements. These weren't musings, they were blueprints. Even in architecture schools of the time, garden design was considered a spiritual discipline. You learned to read the wind, to listen to the land. You studied geometry and soil with equal reverence, not to dominate nature, but to collaborate with it. And from this mindset emerged a worldview coolness as virtue, not just physical coolness, emotional, moral, social coolness. The kind that lets you sit with discomfort and think clearly. The kind that lets you build a home where others feel safe to breathe, sip tea, and write poems about dappled light. You walk now through a quieter part of the garden, a scholar's corner perhaps. A small stone desk sits beneath a lemon tree. You imagine someone here once using a reed pen, dipping it into ink made from gallnuts and soot, writing a letter or a line of verse about the way the breeze curved around the roof beam. Next to the desk is a clay amphora partially buried in earth. You touch it still cool, likely once used to store rosewater or sherbet, chilled not by ice but by the earth's own deep patience. Above you, a wood-beamed trellis holds up a tangle of grapevines. Their leaves shift in the dimming light, and you can hear the change coming. Not just in temperature, but in tone. The garden speaks differently at night. And so did the poets. Evening was when the metaphors deepened, when the wind became not just air, but a messenger. In some traditions, the evening breeze carried secrets, news, dreams. The Sufi mystics of Persia believed the wind was a veil between this world and the next, that it moved not just over the skin, but through the soul. You pause and feel it just for a moment brush past your cheek and continue down the corridor of cypress. It doesn't say anything exactly, but it suggests everything. The gardener poets knew that the garden wasn't just a place to cool down. It was a place to wake up gently to the world's quieter rhythms. You sit again, and the wind finds you like an old friend returning to share one last verse before bed. And so you listen, as they once did, to the poetry of the air. The wind has shifted again, cooler now, a touch moister and touched with the scent of wet clay and unopened blossoms. You inhale slowly. It's no longer the sharp, bright breeze of afternoon. It's softened, heavier. Night is coming, and with it, a whole new set of rules for the Persian garden. What worked during the day doesn't always hold true once the sun disappears. But Persian designers didn't just plan for heat, they anticipated the rhythm of seasons and the full arc of a day. Which is why now, as you step toward a stone pathway lined with flickering oil lamps, you're entering the domain of seasonal intelligence. You approach what looks like another sleeping pavilion, but this one is deeper, partially subterranean, with stairs leading down into a shaded room. Inside, mosaic floors, curved ceilings, and a pool set directly beneath a skylight. This is a summer retreat, known as a sardab, and you've seen its kind before. But this one is more elaborate. The room is designed to stay cool during the blazing months, thanks to its underground position and constant airflow from a nearby qanat. You sit at the edge of the pool, listening to the way the water seems to hum against the stone. But what about winter? A Persian garden didn't disappear with the seasons. In fact, some of its cleverest tricks were reserved for cold weather. You make your way back upstairs and into a nearby courtyard that faces the morning sun. Here the walls are plastered in pale clay that absorbs heat during the day and radiates it back slowly at night, like a sun-charged heater. It's angled just so that it catches the early light of winter, warming the stone floor where people would sit to sip tea or breakfast on bread and quince preserves. Some homes included double walls with air channels between them. In summer, those channels allowed hot air to escape upward. In winter, they were sealed to keep warmth inside. Tiles changed too. Darker glazes were placed in areas meant to capture heat, while lighter ones reflected it in summer. Historians still argue how advanced these strategies really were. Were these intuitive tricks passed down from master to apprentice? Or were they codified into a true science of passive climate control? The answer is probably both. Regardless, the results endure. You're now standing beside a wind tower unlike any you've seen so far. This one has adjustable vents, wooden slats that can be turned to close off the breeze entirely during the coldest nights. Nearby, a tandoor oven is sunk into the ground, offering both warmth and food in the cooler months. Persian homes were designed to be seasonal chameleon spaces that adjusted with grace to the changing climate. And nowhere was this more evident than in the sleeping arrangements. In summer, families dragged their mattresses out into the open-air courtyards, or iwans, setting them beneath stars and wind towers. In winter, they returned to inner rooms, clustered around a corsi, a low table with a brazier underneath and a heavy quilt over top. You'd slide your legs under share stories, drink hot tea, and warm yourself slowly from the toes up. But the garden still played a role. Even in winter, the wind was present, just redirected, channeled to sunny courtyards, blocked from shaded alleys. The structure acted like a lung, expanding and contracting depending on whether the season called for cooling or warming. You pass by a winter wall now, thick and east-facing, lined with espaliered trees, trained flat against the stone. These were often citrus, sour, orange, lemon, or even rare Seville varieties. Their fruit ripened in the cold months, and their positioning allowed both insulation and harvest during a time when freshness was otherwise scarce. The path leads you to a rooftop terrace accessible by a narrow stone stair. Up here, you find a very different kind of Persian garden. Bare bones, minimalist, but still deliberate. Low walls break the wind. Terracotta pots cluster together, some empty, some holding hardy herbs that can survive cooler nights. A clay bowl of water reflects the stars. This is the winter lookout where people came to sip hot drinks, breathe clean air, and watch the world settle into its colder, quieter self. And as you sit there now, the wind curling around the chimney stack of a distant home, you feel it again, that partnership. Between structure and nature, between stone and breeze, between logic and beauty. You realize that these weren't separate tricks. The towers, the qanats, the scent, corridors, the fruit walls, the fountains. They were all part of the same seasonal dance, designed not to control nature, but to join its rhythm, to cool when it's hot, to warm when it's cold, to scent when it's still, to hush when the world is loud. The garden, like the wind, changes, learns, adapts, and tonight it has chosen comfort over spectacle, cool air over clamor, and silence over strategy. You lean back on the rooftop ledge, eyes on the stars as the night settles deeper into its design. From the rooftop, the city of Yazd stretches out like a whisper. Clay domes and wind catchers pepper the horizon, catching moonlight on their edges like drowsy sentinels. But as you gaze over the rooftops, something strikes you. This city is breathing. Not metaphorically, not poetically, actually breathing. Because Persian wind training didn't stop at the garden gate. It expanded, evolved, and scaled up, shaping entire neighborhoods and cities into cool, livable organisms in the middle of the desert. You descend slowly from the rooftop and follow a sloped alleyway. The houses here aren't uniform, but they share a language. Thick walls, arched passages, courtyards hidden behind plain doors. Badgirs rise above the skyline like sails on a motionless sea, and you realize you're walking through an ancient form of climate-responsive urban planning. It begins with orientation. Homes and streets were laid out according to prevailing wind patterns. In Yazd, for example, city planners knew exactly where the cool evening breezes would enter from, often from the northwest. So alleyways angled slightly to channel that breeze into the heart of the neighborhood. Walls were curved or placed with small breaks to reduce dust storms and redirect heat. You pass under a vaulted corridor, now a sabbats, as they're called, offering sudden and total shade. These were the pedestrian highways of old Persia, bridging homes while shading entire streets. In winter, they cut the wind. In summer, they trapped cool air below their arches. You stop under one and close your eyes. The breeze that arrives here is muted, almost respectful. It's traveled across gardens' rooftops and shaded paths to find you. You inhale deeply and detect something familiar. Mint. Somewhere nearby, a home garden is doing its job. The wind carries that garden with it, block to block. Historians still argue just how intentional this large-scale cooling network was. Some believe it was a gradual result of copying what worked at the household level. Others insist it was a form of climate engineering designed from the beginning, passed from architect to apprentice like sacred code. What's clear, though, is that the entire city participated. Every house contributed. Step inside a modest home and you'll find a central courtyard, typically sunken with a basin or small fountain. These inner gardens were more than aesthetic, they were part of the ventilation system. When the badgir pulled air in from above, it was often directed through the courtyard, first cooling it further before entering the living quarters. And what did this mean in practice? It meant community-wide comfort. No one needed to blast mechanical fans. No one lived in unbearable heat. Even the poorest homes, if built with the right angles and materials, could enjoy temperatures 10 to 15 degrees cooler than the open street. You follow the wind now through a narrow street lined with mud brick facades. Each window is small shaded, each doorframe recessed. The homes look humble, but you begin to understand their power. Every one of them has a role in the city's lungs, some drawing wind and some pushing it out, all contributing to the flow. It's like a city made of lungs, breathing in the hot, dry air of the day, cooling it, scenting it, and exhaling it for others to use. And not just wind water, too. You come upon a qanat shaft in the middle of the street, covered with a stone slab and surrounded by a circle of worn bricks. These openings are often overlooked, but they're essential maintenance access points for the vast underground river system running beneath the city. not just for gardens but for public fountains, homes, mosques, and caravanserais. You turn a corner and see one now, a public sabile, where a spout of water flows constantly into a shallow basin. A small cup hangs on a chain beside it. In ancient times, travelers would refill their flasks here, and the surrounding area would benefit from the sudden burst of evaporative coolness. Above it, a simple wind catcher rises not attached to a palace, but to a bathhouse. That's right, hammams had their own cooling and heating systems using wind towers in tandem with hypocaust heating below. Hot air was vented upward while cool air was invited in. The result, baths that felt like summer springs even in the peak of July. You keep walking and start to notice something else. Chatter. Not loud, not intrusive. Just the quiet hum of people sitting in threshold spaces, on ledges, under arches, on low platforms near their front doors. Why here? Because these are air node spots where wind converges after a long journey through corridors, towers, and tree canopies. Families gather here at twilight, not just to gossip, but to cool off. It's social comfort, architectural hospitality, and suddenly the city feels like a garden itself, larger, more complex, more lived in, but still breathing, still scented, still shaped by the same principles that cooled a single pavilion hundreds of years ago. The wind slips past you again, headed somewhere else now. Maybe to another rooftop, another garden, another cup of cold sherbet on a windowsill, waiting for someone to return from prayer. And you smile, knowing this, you are part of the system now. You're not just a visitor. You're a note in the city's quiet, cooling song. You follow the fading breeze down a lane paved with quiet and dust, where lantern light flickers against time-worn brick. The sky above Yaz turns deep indigo, the last saffron streaks of sunset slipping away like the day's final exhale. But the wind does not end here. It keeps going outward, beyond this Persian garden city, out past the walls, past borders, past empires. Because as brilliant as these systems are, the story doesn't end in Persia. In fact, much of what you've seen has been borrowed, adapted, and reimagined across continents and centuries. The wind, after all, doesn't carry passports. Step with me now, lightly into the age of transmission, when the secrets of Persian air cooling were carried by travelers, traders, and invaders, all of whom tucked a bit of that breeze into their own architectural dreams. First stop, Greece and Rome, where similar wind-catching techniques were already developing in parallel, particularly in the hot, dry zones of Asia Minor. But after contact with Persian territories, especially during the Achaemenid and later Sassanid periods, Greek architects began experimenting more intentionally with ventilated courtyards and peristyles designed for airflow. The Persians had shown that wind was not just background, it was an element to train. Then came the Arabs. As Islamic culture spread east and west, Persian garden design went with it, carried by scholars, engineers, and caliphs alike. In Baghdad, the Abbasid capital architects imported qanat systems, redesigned palaces to include Chahar Bagh layouts, and began building wind towers in earnest. The Baghi Fin in Kashan, one of the most famous Persian gardens, served as both model and legend. You find yourself now in Cairo, where wind towers still stand. They look different. Mashrabia screens replacing stonework. More wood, more ornament, but the principle is the same. Hot air rises, cool air falls. Wind can be taught to serve. The city's historic Beit al-Suhaimi home uses both natural ventilation and shading to cool rooms without fans. Sound familiar? Then there's Mughal India. The mighty emperors of Delhi and Agra were enamored with Persian aesthetics. Babur, the empire's founder, wrote extensively of his longing for the gardens of Samarkand and Herat. So when he settled in the hot plains of North India, he did what any homesick emperor would: he built paradise. Chahar Baghs bloomed across the empire. The Red Fort and Shalimar Bagh in Kashmir included cooling water channels, high walls, and precisely aligned trees. Even the Taj Mahal, often admired purely for its beauty, is part of a vast cooling complex designed so that breezes moved across the river and gardens before reaching the marble mausoleum. Historians still debate whether these were copies or cultural evolutions, but anyone who stood inside a Mughal pavilion on a monsoon evening knows that's Persian air logic breathing through Indian stone. And then there's Spain. You duck under a stone arch and find yourself figuratively anyway in Andalusia. In Cordoba, Granada, Seville. Persian cooling evolved into something else entirely Andalusian serenity. The Alhambra is perhaps the most famous example. Its open courtyards channeling wind and scent through marble halls were built on the bones of Persian principles. The Spanish called them patios, but they were cousins of the paradisa. Even as far north as Venice, Islamic engineers brought through trade were consulted on how to build houses that breathed facing canals for airflow using open stairwells and water courtyards as temperature balancers. Some early Renaissance thinkers in Italy even referenced Persian techniques in their treatises on architecture. And now across time, you arrive here today, in a modern apartment with noisy vents, in a high-rise with sun-scorched windows and humming machines. The wind outside is still moving. It remembers how it used to be caught, trained, thanked. You think of eco-architecture, passive houses, bioclimatic design, new words for old wisdom. Architects in Iran, Egypt, Morocco, and even California are once again looking backward to move forward, studying badgirs, qanats, and seasonal gardens for ideas that use less power and create more calm. You think of wind again, not as nuisance, but as partner. The next time you open a window, you'll notice the angle, the draft, the way one room seems cooler than the other. You'll remember the cypress walls, the jasmine-scented corridors, the fountains that murmured like dream water. The Persians weren't just builders, they were listeners. They trained air like it was a guest, not something to force, but something to welcome. And so across centuries and borders, the wind was passed from hand to hand like a scroll, its pages torn, but its message still clear. You can live gently in a harsh world. You just have to learn how to place the door. You stand now in the present, but the wind still feels ancient. Maybe it's the memory of clay against your fingertips, or the shape of a garden that hasn't existed for hundreds of years, but still lingers in your mind like an afterimage. You're starting to realize something important. This wasn't just about clever engineering. It was and still is about philosophy. A philosophy of comfort, born from scarcity. A way of moving through the world with elegance even when the world itself seems determined to wear you down. You find yourself in imagination or in dream, back in Yazd. The wind towers rise once more, casting long shadows across sunlit roofs. The garden hums softly behind tall walls. The city hasn't changed much, not in the ways that matter. You visit one more house. This one has seen centuries. Its plaster has been repaired, its fountains retiled, its wind catchers restuccoed. But the principle is unchanged. Inside, a child sleeps beside an open window, a book face down on their chest. Their room is quiet, but not still. A breeze enters from a high vent, curling around the corners of the room, lifting the edges of a woven curtain, moving like thought itself soft, cyclical, certain. You pause by the threshold. That same wind has passed through so many spaces, through palaces, through workshops, through gardens, baths, prayer halls, and markets. It has lifted the scent of crushed herbs and rose petals. It has whispered through walls carved by hands long buried. And now it brushes past you as if to say, I'm still here. You remembered. But there's one last piece to this long, sleepy story. One final truth carried by the breeze. This isn't over, because the systems you've explored, passive cooling scented airflow, seasonal architecture, quiet design, aren't relics. They're solutions waiting for rediscovery. In a warming world where electricity groans and cities overheat, these ancient tools are becoming vital again. Architects are returning to clay, to thick walls, to shaded courtyards and garden canopies. Some are even building modern badgirs, pairing them with solar technology. In Yazd, experimental schools and eco-lodges are reviving qanat networks, testing new ways to store and guide water using 2,000-year-old blueprints. And beyond Iran, in countries like Morocco, India, the UAE, and southern Spain, urban wind strategies are making a comeback, less to dazzle, more to cool quietly. It's a slow revival, of course. Wind doesn't rush, neither does wisdom. But you, having walked through this journey, know what to look for now. The shaded bench placed just so, the narrow corridor that captures a breeze, the rooftop garden with its whispering vines, the ceramic tiles that stay cool long after sunset. Even in your own home, you'll notice these things. A fan positioned with care, a window that opens not just to view, but to flow, a potted basil plant placed near where the wind sneaks in. Small gestures, gentle adjustments, a lifestyle of listening. That's what Persian gardeners knew. And that's what they passed down, not in textbooks, but in bricks, in poems, in petals. You leave the final house and walk into the evening air. The wind has shifted one last time. It no longer urges you forward. It slows, softens, waits, as if content. Because it has done its job. It has carried you across centuries through gardens and dreams and placed you here gently on the cool edge of sleep. You don't walk anymore, you drift. The final section of the garden unfolds around you like a page turning in slow motion. No urgency, no noise, just dusk softening into night. The air is perfectly still and yet still moving, wrapping you in something that feels older than stone and lighter than shadow. You're back in the heart of the garden now, back where you began. But everything has shifted. The walls are the same. The trees haven't changed. The fountain still hums with its soft, unbothered rhythm. But you have changed. Because now you know the story inside the story. The physics beneath the poetry. The logic hidden behind the ivy. What once felt like mystery is now something else entirely: mastery. Quiet, patient, centuries-old mastery. You settle onto a cushion laid out beside a low-tiled platform. There's a ceramic cup of something chilled in your hand, maybe water infused with cucumber, or perhaps the last of the sherbet. It doesn't matter. You're not thinking in categories anymore. You're thinking in temperature, in texture, in wind paths. And even that thought dissolves. This garden is not a space anymore. It's a system, a memory, a lullaby of structure. Overhead, the stars bloom slowly into view. Their light is older than the garden, but the garden knew they were coming. It's shaped to greet them. Look closely and you'll notice how the walkways align with constellations, how the openings in the wind catchers face not just the prevailing breeze, but specific celestial positions during solstice. Historians still debate whether that was intentional, but tonight it feels too precise not to be. You hear the water one last time, not trickling, breathing, like the wind, like the earth, like the whole space itself. In this moment, you understand what Persian builders truly created: not just a cooling mechanism, not just a paradise, but a timeless envelope of sleep. A place where heat was met not with panic, but with design. Where discomfort wasn't avoided, it was shaped, softened, cooled until it let go. Where life could slow and stay slow. Even now, as the scent of jasmine thickens around your shoulders, you sense the day sighing its final breath. The walls are still warm to the touch, but fading. The breeze is patient. The darkness is not lonely. You lie back. The sky opens. The garden closes in gentle hush, and the wind, having told its story, becomes quiet once more. And now there's nothing left to do. You've walked the old corridors, felt the shade of trees that remember empires, heard the wind tell its slow, looping tale, touched tiles cooled by centuries of quiet logic. Let it all slip from your mind now. You don't have to remember the names. or the technicalities. The terms badgir, qanat, chahar, bag, they were only ever vessels. What they carried was peace. Let your breath slow to match the fountain's rhythm. Let your shoulders sink into that soft feeling of having nothing else to do. Let your mind follow the breeze down the corridor around the arch across the water and out into the star-dotted silence. You're not in a story anymore. You're in a stillness that was crafted for you, thoughtfully, generously, beautifully. Even now as you lie here, whether on a real pillow or just the imagined stone bench beneath a fig tree, know this: the wind you felt tonight was real, and it knows how to find you again. So close your eyes, loosen your grip on the day, and let the cool air carry you not away but deeper in, into comfort, into calm, into sleep.